For this week, we're going to talk about lab safety, biosafety, and biosecurity. So this topic is actually very important to us kasi nga naman we're going to work in a laboratory where we are going to be exposed in different types of hazards. Okay? So ano ba yung mga practices that we need to do to avoid those hazards? So first, what are hazards? Ano ba yung mga hazard natin? Ngayon, hindi lang yan biological hazard, hindi lang yan chemical hazard. But ang pinaka-common talaga na hazard that we encounter actually biological and chemical hazards. Pero hindi lang yon. Marami pang klase ng hazard. So, pwede rin electric shock kasi nga naman we also handle machines and equipment, toxic vapors, compressed gases, flammable liquids, radioactive material kasi we have a department known as the nuclear medicine. Kapag nagtrabaho ka sa nuc med, you're going to handle radioactive materials. And corrosive substances, mechanical trauma, poisons, and of course, biologic materials. Now, we have your standard that we actually follow. So, yung standard na sinusunod natin sa safety is the standard being or the standard that was created by OSHA. So, ano ba yung OSHA? OSHA, this is an act in the US. Okay? So, according sa OSHA na yan, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they are the ones authorized to conduct on-site inspection to determine whether an employer is complying with the mandatory standards. So, yung OSHA, it is a governing body na gumawa ng mga safety standards that we practice in our laboratories. And then, yan din ang safety standard that is being adopted here in the Philippines. But in the Philippines, the one that conducts visit or on-site inspection is actually the Department of Health. So, DOH ang gumagawa ng mga inspection sa mga healthcare facilities natin or laboratory. Kapag conforming sila, then pwede silang mag-proceed. Kapag non-conformity, then hindi pwede bigyan ng license to operate ang isang laboratory. So, again, ang basis nila is the safety practices being standardized by the OSHA. So, OSHA, again, they create the standards that regulate safety in the laboratory. So, ano ba yung mga different standard they being created under the OSHA, that was created under the OSHA? So, you have the bloodborne pathogen standard. So, ano ba yung mga safety practices kapag bloodborne pathogens? Formaldehyde standard, lab standard, hazard communication standards, respiratory and air contaminant standard, and of course, the PPE standard or personal protective equipment standard. So, sino ba yung mga tao na responsible to make sure na safety practices is being practiced in the laboratory? So, dalawa kasi ang taong responsible. First is the employer. Kapag employer, ito yung may-ari ng laboratory. Pangalawa is the employee. Kapag employee, kayo yon, di ba? Yung mga medtech, yung mga staff. Okay? So, dalawa ang responsible sa safety ng isang laboratory. Yung may-ari and then yung mga nagtatrabaho doon. So, yung employer naman, sino ba yung employer? So, possible na someday kayo yung magiging employer kasi nga medtech kayo, marunong kayo sa lab, so pwede kayong magtayo ng laboratory. Which is ginagawa ng maraming medtech. Maraming medtech na nagtatayo ng sariling lab. And malaki rin ang kita doon. So, okay din yun. So, again, kapag naging employer ka, nagtayo ka ng sarili mong lab, first, you must establish laboratory work methods and safety policies. So, ikaw yung in charge para mag-aral ng OSHA standard. And yung OSHA standard na yun, pag naaral mo na, kailangan gawan mo yun ng mga tinatawag natin na safety policy. So, yung safety policy na yun, it is a document na gagawin mo siya, dapat written siya, dapat printed document siya, and then, meron doong mga procedure. Ano ba yung mga safety procedure na gagawin mo? Or what you call the standard operating procedures. Okay? Basta tandaan nyo, yung mga policy na yan, hindi yan basta sinabi lang. Kapag policy, dapat meron kang written, okay, or printed material to make sure that you really have a policy. So, yung employee ang responsible. So, yung employer, yung may-ari ng lab, ang responsible doon. Another thing is that the employer should provide supervision and guidance to employees. So, dapat mag-hire siya ng lab supervisor and also training, di ba? Kapag guidance, dapat yung mga employee trained din. Okay, they are well educated regarding safety practices. And of course, safety information, training, PPE, and medical surveillance to employees. And then, of course, provide and maintain equipment and laboratory facilities. When you say provide and maintain equipment, ibig sabihin noon, hindi lang basta-basta pinapabayaan yung equipment. 'Di ba? Syempre, kapag sira na yan, tumutunog na, kinakalawang na, dapat it should undergo preventive maintenance. Kasi yung mga machine na hindi tumutuloy sa mga preventive maintenance, ito yung mga machine na pwedeng sumabog or masira na pwedeng mag-cause ng harm sa mga workers. Okay? So, importante yun na kailangan yung mga machine yan well-maintained. Okay? Lahat ng equipment well-maintained para hindi tayo mag-cause ng accidents. So, pagdating naman sa part ng mga staff, 'di ba? Ng mga medtech. So, kayo 'yon, employee, right? So, kapag employee ka, nagtatrabaho ka sa lab, of course, dapat alam mo kung ano ba yung mga safety standards na 'yon. So, when you go to work, you will be oriented regarding the different safety standards. So, kailangan basahin mo yung mga safety standard na meron sa laboratory. Aralin mo siya. And of course, comply with all of these safety standards and practices. Another thing is, have a positive attitude. Kapag positive attitude, it means cooperative ka. So, kapag sinabi ng supervisor mo, ng coworker mo na ganito ang batas sa laboratory, ganito ang mga procedure natin, dapat sumunod ka. Hindi ka dapat susuway. Kasi kapag may mga sumusuway, then doon tayo makakaroon ng aksidente. And then, be alert and give prompt notification of unsafe condition and practices. When you say prompt notification, ibig sabihin yan, for example, yung aircon tumutulo, may tubig na sa sahig, di ba? Tapos yung tubig gumagapang na dun sa mga makina, malamang makukuryente ka na. So kapag nakita mo yung ganong condition na hindi siya mukhang safe, then dapat i-notify mo yung supervisor mo na, ma'am, sir, baka makuryente tayo dito, baka sumabog yung makina. Ito na yung tubig, basang-basa na. Okay? Another thing is, engage in the conduct of safe work practices and of course, use of PPE. So, ikaw yung nangunguna sa pagsunod and then sa practice mo, pinapakita mo na you really comply to the different safety standards. Now, how about the signages and labeling? So, napaka-importante ng mga signages na yan. Kasi nga naman, ang objective ng mga signages na yan is, within a glance, alam mo na ito ang magiging danger na papasukan ko. Pagpasok mo sa isang kwarto, may mga signages yan. Tulad ng lab natin sa school, kapag nakita nyo, maraming signages kapag pumasok kayo sa lab. So, alam mo, yung mga gagawin mong safety precautions doon. So, pinaka-example is the NFPA rating guide. So, for the NFPA, ito yung mga nakadikit talaga sa mga reagents and chemicals. Tulad ng nasa next slide, may kita mo, meron siyang box na diamond. Okay, so ito yung label ng isang chemical and then may nakadikit na diamond dyan. Tapos may mga numbers. This is the NFPA guide. So ano ba yung mga NFPA guide na yan? So ito ang NFPA guide natin. May kita mo, diamond yan. Tapos may iba't ibang kulay. So kapag red, ibig sabihin yan, the chemical is flammable. And then minsan, nilalagyan mo yan ng mga number dyan sa loob. Kung ano ba yung characteristic ng chemical. O kunwari, nilagay mo red. Diba? Red yan. Tapos number 4 ang nakalagay. Right? So, kapag red number 4, ibig sabihin noon, the chemical will vaporize and readily burn at normal temperatures. Okay? So, yun ang ibig sabihin ng red 4. How about kapag naging yellow? Ibig sabihin yan, unstable yung chemical. So, meron siyang instability hazard. So, any changes of temperature or condition can actually lead to harm or explosion. Pwede, 'di ba? Kaya ang instability standard Tulad niyan, yellow, tapos nilagay mo number 2. Ibig sabihin niya, the chemical is violent chemical change at high temperature or pressure. Now, for the blue, ito yung mga health hazard natin. So, kapag nakita mo blue, and then number 2, it means it can cause temporary incapacitation or residual injury to the person. Now, for the white, this is special hazard, and then meron siya mga different abbreviation or symbols. So, pag nakita mo white with ALK, it means the substance is alkaline. So, ganon ang ating NFPA rating guides. Okay? So, at a glance, may kita mo na ako yung mga possible na hazard, meron yung chemical na yun. So, dito nga, example ng label is this one. So, may kita mo, ito yung label ng chemicals. Meron siyang name ng chemical, ano ba yung storage condition, saan ba siya nanggaling, and of course, the safety standards na kailangan mong gawin. So, importante yan. Lagi yung present. And then besides that, this is also another example of a label of a chemical. So may kita mo dito sa part na yung bandang baba, may nakalagay dyan, see safety data sheet for further details. So pwede kasi yung label simple lang like that. So pero you must be able to provide what you call a safety data sheet. Kapag safety data sheet, ito yung document regarding sa safety procedure pagdating sa chemical na yan. So lahat ng chemical actually required sila magbigay ng safety data sheet. Requirement yon. So it is a document na talagang thorough yung explanation kung ano ba yung mga hazard and ano ba yung mga safety precautions na kailangan mong gawin when handling that chemical. So, all in-house prepared reagents. Kapag in-house prepared reagents, ibig sabihin nun, tinimpla mo siya from a stock reagent. Kunyari yan, nakita mong picture dyan, di ba? So, that is a methanol. So, kapag yung bote na yan, ito yung pure mo na meta. Ito yung pure mo or stock solution mo. Okay? So, hindi naman siya ginagamit as a pure. Usually, yung mga chemical niyan, you must be able to dilute that. So, kapag diluted na, ito yung mga prepared reagents mo. So, from that stock na nakalagay sa malaking bote, magdi-dilute ka para makagawa ng different solutions. So, make sure that you're able to label it properly in a standard manner. So, ano ba yung mga standard labeling ng mga prepared solutions or prepared reagents? First is the chemical identity. Siyempre, ano yung pangalan niya? Concentration, hazard warning, special handling, storage condition, date prepared, and also expiration date, and the preparer's initial. So, ito yung mga standard na label kapag nag-prepare ka ng mga reagent sa lab or solution sa laboratory. Do not forget this one. So, let's go to safety equipment. Ang pinakamagandang example ng safety equipment is this. Ito yung common na meron tayo sa lab. The safety shower together with the eye wash. So, lagi tayong gumagamit yan actually. The eye wash station, the safety shower. So, lagi siyang kailangan nasa laboratory. Now, again, of course, fire extinguisher. Kailangan din siya. So, yung tatlong yan, napaka-basic niyan. So, all lab are required to have safety shower, eye wash station, and fire extinguisher. So, yung safety shower na yan, ginagamit siya just in case matapunan ka ng chemical or any agents. Yung eye wash station naman, kapag meron ka mga splashes sa eyes. And of course, fire extinguisher kapag merong sunog. So, it is recommended that safety shower deliver at least 30 to 50 gallons of water per minute. So, meron ding standard yan, yung mga safety shower. Hindi yan basta-basta lang na may nalabas na konting kapatak na tubig. Dapat, per minute, it should be 30 to 50 gallons of water. Okay? And then, 20 to 50 pounds per square inch PSI, yung pressure. So, dapat hindi siya yung mahina, dapat marami at malakas. So, may pressure yung paglabas ng tubig. 20 to 50 pounds per square inch or PSI yung pressure niya. And be located in areas where corrosive liquids are stored or used. Sa eye wash station naman, so dapat within 100 feet or 10 seconds travel in the laboratory area with a chemical or biological exposure hazard. So, kung nasaan yung mga chemical, kung nasaan siya naka-store, dapat within seconds makapunta ka doon sa eye wash station. So, usually magkasama yan, yung eye wash saka yung shower area. Other items din na kailangan for safety include the fire blanket, spill kit, yan. Kapag spill kit, ito yung mga ito yung mga gagamitin mo just in case meron kang mga chemical spills. So, maraming klaseng spill kit. Merong spill kit for chemical spill, meron ding for biological spill. Yon. So, depende yan kung ano yung mga kailangan mo. Basta kailangan meron kang spill kit. And of course, the first aid supplies. Mechanical pipetting devices must be used for manipulating all types of liquid in the lab, including water. And of course, mouth pipetting is strictly prohibited. So, what are chemical fume hoods and biological safety cabinets? Ang fume hood and biosafety cabinet, magkaiba yan. Okay? Kapag fume hood, of course, ginagamit to sa mga chemicals na merong mga nilalabas na toxic fumes, diba? So, again, fume hoods, they are required to contain expelled noxious and hazardous fumes from chemical reagents. So, importante rin na i-test natin kapag yung fume hood natin is actually working properly. So, ang nilalagay dyan is, maglalagay ka silang piece of tissue paper inside the hood, in order for you to detect the airflow. Kung tama ba yung kanyang airflow. So, ano ba yung mga proper na airflow natin? So, of course, kapag nilagay mo yung tissue doon, dapat yung tissue na yan, pupunta siya doon sa labasan ng hangin. Para makita mo yung airflow niya kung tama ba. Kasi, ang fume hood, merong yung area na pumapasok yung hangin, tapos may area naman lumalabas yung hangin. So, dapat pag nilagay mo yung tissue na yon, pupunta siya doon sa area kung saan lumalabas yung hangin. Para masabi mo na okay ang airflow ng isang fume hood. So, the hood should never be operated with the sash fully open. Kapag sash, ito yung pintuan niya. Ito yung inaangat na part. So, nakikita mo sa picture, meron dyang sash. Ito yung naangat na part niya. Okay? And then, again, dapat hindi siya fully open. Konti lang ang pagbubukas mo dyan sa sash na yan. Para nga naman, hindi sumingaw yung hangin at hindi siya lumabas. So again, the hood should never be operated with the sash fully open, and a maximum operating sash height should be established and conspicuously marked then. So, periodic ventilation should be evaluated by measuring the phase velocity with a calibrated velocity meter. So, meron tayong velocity meter for you to check kung tama ba yung velocity ng wind inside the fume hood. So, the velocity at the face of the hood with the sash in normal operating position should only be 100 to 120 feet per minute. So, ito yung ating standard sa fume hood. Dapat 100 to 120 feet per minute. And then, smoke testing can also be done. Kapag smoke testing, so naligay ka doon ng konting smoke, and then tinitingnan mo kung saan ba pupunta yung usok. Dapat doon siya sa labasan mismo ng air. Parang sa tissue test lang din siya. So, you're just going to test ano ba yung direction ng air. Okay? So, ganun ang ating fume hoods. So, paano naman yung mga biological safety cabinet or biosafety cabinet? So, yung biosafety cabinet na yan, ginagamit ito sa mga hazardous materials that are under the biologic classification. Okay? So, ano mo yung example ng mga biologic classification na hazardous na yan? Example, yung CSF mo, yung fluid mo sa brain, di ba? Yung blood. Okay? That is a biologic specimen. Urine. Yun ang example. So, biological safety cabinet, they remove particles that may be harmful to the employee who is working with potentially infectious biologic specimen. So, kapag biologic specimen, gagamit ka ng biosafety cabinet. If it is the chemical na may toxic fumes, gagamit ka ng fume hood, di ba? So, ito yung picture, example of a biological safety cabinet. Actually, this is what we have in the laboratory. Ito yung model na meron tayo, the BioBase. Okay? So, accordingly, biosafety cabinets are designed to offer various level of protection depending on the biosafety level of the specific lab. So, hindi lang yan ng biosafety cabinet. So, marami kang klase ng biosafety cabinet that we're going to study pagdating natin sa third year subjects nyo. So, biological safety cabinets should be periodically recertified to ensure continued optimum performance. Kapag recertification, ibig sabihin noon, you're going to test pa rin yung biological safety cabinet mo if it is really working or not. Diba? So, dapat meron kang certification dyan na nag-test ka na ng biosafety cabinet and then working properly siya. Okay? So, importante dyan, walang bara. So, walang filter exclusion or rupture that can compromise their effectiveness. Kasi yung air dyan sa loob, controlled din yan. So, yung air na pumapasok, hindi siya lalabas. Doon lang siya sa loob. And then, kapag lumabas na yung air na yon, dapat filtered na siya. Kasi sa loob niyang, ng biosafety cabinet niya, meron siya mga HEPA filter. So, lahat ng air na lalabas sa environment, wala nang mga microorganism, wala nang biologic hazard. Kasi na-filter na siya nung HEPA filter pa lang. And then, para mamatay yung naiwan dyan sa loob ng mga infectious particles tulad ng mga bacteria or fungi, merong yung UV light. Yung UV light niya, binubuksan niya para patayin yung mga naiwan dyan na microorganism. Okay, so ganon nag-work ang isang biological safety cabinet. How about the chemical storage equipment? So, marami tayo mga equipment for chemical storage. You have the safety carrier, safety can, safety cabinet, and explosion-proof refrigerator. So, na-example niyan. This one, ito yung kanyang mga picture. So, yung first picture mo, ito yung first picture sa badang left. Ito yung cabinet na kailangan sa mga chemicals. So, dapat steel siya. And then, like that, what you see in the picture. Ito naman na pangalawang picture yung may orange na basket na yan. Ito yung mga safety carrier natin. And then yung sunod na picture, those are the safety can. And then yung pinaka-last na picture, yung parang ref, that is the ref na explosion proof. So dito ini-store yung mga chemicals na kailangan naka-ref, and then mayroon siyang risk na mag-explode. So dapat sa isang explosion proof na refrigerator. Okay? So ito yung mga example. So going back, kapag safety carrier should always be used to transport glass bottles or of acids, alkalis, or organic solvent in volumes larger than 500 ml. So safety cans should be used for storing, dispensing, or disposing of flammables in volume greater than 1 quart. Steel safety cabinet with self-closing doors are required for the storage of flammable liquids. A specially designed explosion-proof refrigerator may be used to store flammable materials. Only the amount of chemical needed for the day should be available at the bench. So, lahat ng mga hindi mo na kailangan, lahat ng nasa storage pa lang, dapat properly stored. Yung mga kailangan mo, yun lang ilalabas mo for the day. So, hindi dapat na lahat ng chemical nakalabas. Kung ano lang yung gagamitin mo for the day, yun lang ang ilalabas mo. So again, these are the pictures. Yan, ng mga kailangan natin. Next. Of course, kailangan mo rin ng PPE, di ba? PPE and hygiene, of course. Right? So kapag PPE, ang pinaka-common na kailangan natin is this one. Di ba? Meron kang visors or the safety goggles or glasses. Of course, you have the gloves na rubberized. Besides the rubberized gloves, you also have the lab coat, proper footwear, and respirator, such as what you can see here in the picture, di ba? Meron kang disposable na footwear for the lab, meron kang respirator, together with the lab gown. So, hindi naman kailangan all the time respirator. Depende pa rin yan kung ano ba yung pinagtatrabahuhan mong laboratory, di ba? Kasi nga naman, kapag hindi ka naman handling airborne particles or highly infectious particles, di mo kailangan ng respirator. Mask lang, okay na. Right? Yun. So, hindi all the time kailangan ng respirator. But ang pinaka-basic na kailangan mo, of course, is the mask. So, going back. So, again, for the PPE and hygiene, you have the safety glasses, goggles, visor, or work shields to protect your eyes and face from splashes. So, ginagamit ito lalo na kapag you are expecting na pwedeng magkaroon ng mga splashes sa eyes mo. Importante yon. And then, of course, contact lenses. As much as possible, iniiwasan natin siya kasi kapag may contact lens ka, mas tumatagal doon yung mga splashes. So, kaya nga naman, usually, ang ginagamit talaga eyeglass na lang. Yun. And then, of course, gloves and rubberized sleeves will protect the hands and arms when using caustic chemicals. So, usually, kapag gloves, ang ginagamit na material is polyvinyl or other non-latex gloves are acceptable alternative for people with latex allergy. Kasi nga naman, usually latex gloves ang ginagamit. Pero kapag allergic ka, pwede ng polyvinyl or other non-latex gloves. Nitrile gloves, yan, okay din naman siya. So, this is compatible with organic solvents than do latex gloves. But most of the time, it is the latex material. Now, for the lab coat, again, so dapat siya ay knit cuff sleeves. So, dapat yung sleeves niya nakapaloob. Should be full length. So, hindi siya pwedeng maiksi. Hindi pwedeng mga 3/4 na yan. Dapat full length. And then, buttoned or made of liquid-resistant material. For the proper footwear, again, shoes constructed of porous materials, open-toed shoes, and sandals are considered ineffective. So, of course, dapat naka-close shoes ka. So, kapag yung lab nyo, talagang hindi kailangan na naka-shoes, kasi nga naman, highly, pwedeng mag-cause ng mga pagkalat ng infection or disease, then pwede ka mag-disposable footwear. Pwede naman yon. Pero definitely, ang pinaka-basic dyan is closed shoes. So, respirators, again, kapag respirator, ito yung mask na meron siyang HEPA filter. So, again, the HEPA filter is high-efficiency particulate air HEPA filter. Must be worn when engineering controls are not feasible, such as when working directly with patient with tuberculosis or performing procedure that may aerosolize specimen of patient with a suspected or confirmed case of TB. So, if you're handling microorganism na airborne, diba, dapat kailangan talaga is respirator. Pero kapag hindi naman airborne, bababa naman yung risk, then mask pwede na. Again, this is the PPE. Okay, you have your footwear, respirator, together with your lab gown. And then, hygiene. Pagdating sa hygiene, importante ang hand washing talaga. Of course. So, when you leave the laboratory, of course, dapat mag-wash ka ng hands muna. That is the best way in order for you to practice infection control. And of course, chemical hygiene. Kasi nga naman, after handling chemicals, tas kakain ka, eh di nakain mo yung chemical, di ba? Right? So, dapat wash your hand properly. Kasi kahit naka-gloves ka, what if hindi mo alam na butas pala yung gloves mo? So, habang nagtatrabaho ka, yung chemical pala nasa kamay mo na. And then, pagkahubad mo ng gloves mo, since hindi mo nga alam, kumain ka, di ba? Kumain ka ng chichirya, kinamay mo lang. Tapos mamaya, na-poison ka na. Right? Yun ang mga example na pwede kang malason kapag hindi ka nahugas ng kamay. So, importante siya sa infection control and chemical hygiene. So, after removing gloves, hands should be washed thoroughly with soap and warm water. After any work with highly toxic carcinogenic chemicals, and face should also be washed. So, hindi lang kamay. Actually, yung kapag hand washing kasi abot yan ng siko eh. Hanggang sa siko, hinuhugasan yan. And then, kapag tulad nga yan, carcinogenic chemicals, pati yung mukha mo, you have to wash that. And then, after, yung iba pa nga, after handling those highly toxic substances, naliligo sila. So, pwede rin maligo. Kaya nga naman sa laboratory, meron ding shower area. Tulad ng lab natin sa school, doon sa animal house, sa baba, meron tayong animal house doon. So, doon yung ating animal care facility sa mga research. So, minsan, kapag nga na-expose yung mga student natin or may possible exposure yung mga student natin sa mga infectious materials or microorganism, then pwede sila mag-shower doon sa ating animal house. May shower doon. Pwede kayong maligo. Okay? Then next is the chemical safety. Now, for the chemical safety, sabi ko nga kanina, lahat ng chemical, meron silang safety data sheet or the SDS. So, ano ba yung nandoon sa safety data sheet na yon? Of course, you have the product name and identification, what are the ingredients that are hazardous, permissible exposure limit, physical and chemical data, health hazard, carcinogenic potential, primary route of entry, fire explosion and hazard activity data, spill disposal procedure, PPE, handling, emergency first aid procedure, storage and transport precaution, chemical manufacturer's name, address, telephone number, and special information section. So, hindi mo naman kailangan i-memorize lahat to. So, I'm not requiring everyone to memorize this. Basta sinasabi ko lang na itong laman ng isang safety data sheet. So, ito yung mga importanteng information na dapat nandoon. Para nga naman yung mga staff, yung mga medtech, aware sila kung paano ba ang proper handling of these chemicals and kung ano yung gagawin. Tulad niyan, sa emergency first aid procedure, di ba? Napaka-importante niyan. So, anong gagawin kapag nainom mo nga or accidental mo nakain yung chemical? So, pwede kang pumunta sa safety data sheet. Ano ba yung emergency and first aid procedure na gagawin mo? So, ito yung example ng isang safety data sheet. Yan. Okay? So, meron kang name, ano ba yung material, andyan siya nakalagay. So, this is just an example. Okay? And then, so, let's go to OSHA. Now, OSHA, again, sabi ko nga kanina, this is the laboratory standard, right? Ito yung institution na gumagawa ng mga safety standards sa mga laboratory. So, OSHA, they require each lab that use hazardous chemicals to have a written chemical hygiene plan. So, sabi ko nga kanina, dapat pagdating sa mga safety policy, hindi yan sinabi lang o pinag-usapan nyo lang na bawal to, bawal yan. Dapat meron ka dyan na written or printed document. Okay? And then, nakalagay doon yung mga plans nyo pagdating sa mga hazardous materials. Ano ba yung mga safety or standard operating procedures nyo? So, here in OSHA, they require everyone na may laboratory that uses hazardous chemicals to have a written chemical hygiene plan. So, this plan provides procedure and work practices for regulating and reducing exposure of lab personnel to hazardous chemicals. So, ano ba yung mga procedure na ginagawa sa lab para minimize ang exposure ng mga worker niya sa chemicals? Of course, for safety purposes. So, when you say hazardous chemicals, those are chemicals that will pose a threat, either physical or health hazard from acute or chronic exposure. So, paano ba yung physical hazard na yun? Of course, kapag acid yan, malamang, di ba? Kapag natapunan ka ng acid, mahapdi yun, so pwedeng magkaroon ka ng burns because of the acid, right? And of course, health hazard na rin yun. Example, yung sa formalin, kapag binuksan mo yung formalin na yan at nasinghot mo yung formalin, it can cause irritation, di ba? Sa mucosa mo, sa nose, hanggang sa lungs mo. So, that is a health hazard. And then, gaano ba yung exposure? Is it acute or chronic? 'Di ba? Meron ba yung long-lasting effect? Tulad na lang ng mga radioactive material, kapag meron kang chronic exposure sa mga radiation, radioactive material, pwede ka magkaroon ng cancer. 'Di ba? Yun ang example of chronic exposure. If it is the acute exposure, ibig sabihin no, once na-expose ka, meron kang nakikita agad. Tulad na lang ng acid spill, di ba? Kapag natapon na ka ng asido, tunaw ang balat mo. Yun ang example of the acute exposure. So, pwede rin yung mga teratogens. Kapag teratogens, ito yung mga chemicals that can cause harm sa mga buntis. Kaya nga naman, kapag ang isang metric buntis, nilalayo siya sa clinical chem. Wala muna siya doon sa maraming chemicals. So, minsan nilalagay siya sa section na wala masyadong chemical tulad ng blood bank. Yan, pwede siya doon. O kaya taga-extract lang siya ng blood. Kasi nga naman, mayroong mga teratogens doon or chemicals that can actually cause harm to the fetus. Okay? So, ganun, kapag buntis ang metek, hindi siya nilalagay sa section na maraming chemicals. Usually, nilalayo siya. And of course, are carcinogen that can cause cancer and other toxic chemicals. So, these are example of storage requirement. So, for the flammable liquids, mineral acid, caustic, perchloric acid, reactive substances. These are the substances. And then, paano ba ang kanyang storage? Okay? So, dapat stored separately ang mga flammable solids, organic acids, oxidizers, and water reactive substances. So, for the flammable materials naman, flammable and combustible chemicals, so they are classified according to flash point, which is temperature at which sufficient vapor is given off to form an ignitable mixture with air. So, kapag flammable chemicals, dapat titignan mo yung flash point. So, kapag flash point daw, ito yung temperature na pwede na siyang mag-cause ng fire, pwede na siyang sumabog or mag-ignite, di ba? Okay, kaya tinawag na flash point. So, importante yon. So, a flammable liquid has a flash point below 37.8 degrees Celsius or 100 Fahrenheit, and combustible liquids have, by definition, have a flash point of above 37.8 degrees Celsius. So, example of flammable liquids are acetone, benzene, ethanol, heptane, isopropanol, methanol, toluene, and xylene. Gases as well. Ito yung mga combustible natin such as hydrogen, solids, and also paraffin. So, kapag na-reach na yung temperature na yan, pwede silang mag-cause ng fire. 'Di ba? Or pwede silang mag-flame or combust. Kaya nga naman, dapat yung temperature, yung flash point na yan, hindi niya dapat ma-reach. So, kapag nakita mo, flash point is 37.8, so dapat yung storage niya below 37.8. Okay? Hindi pwedeng above. Kasi kapag above na, then pwede na siyang mag-flame. Pwede na siyang mag-combust. Okay? Those are the flash point. Kaya importante yung flash point. Tinitingnan din siya. Now, for the corrosive chemicals naman, these are chemicals that can cause injuries sa skin through direct contact. Example dyan, yung mga acid natin, tsaka mga alkaline substances, di ba? So, acids, acetic acid, sulfuric acid, hydrochloric, and bases, such as the ammonium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, and sodium hydroxide. So, they can cause severe burns that require immediate flushing with water. So, ganun na naman, kapag meron kang corrosive chemical, ang pinaka-first aid mo dyan is to wash with water. 'Di ba? Yun lang. And then, of course, dalhin sa ospital. Kasi nga naman, kapag malalim yung burn dyan, pati yung lower layer of the skin mo or the inner layer of the skin will be affected. Now, for the reactive chemicals, kapag reactive, it means they can spontaneously explode or ignite or that involve a heat or flammable or explosive gases. So, kapag spontaneous explosion, ibig sabihin noon, kapag na-reach nyo na yung kanyang flash point, pwede na siyang mag-ignite and cause fire. Kaya nga naman, may mga lab na nasusunog din, 'di ba? 'Di ba minsan nababalitaan nyo, yung factory ng mga fireworks, 'di ba? Yun yung common na nasusunog, yung mga factory ng fireworks. Kasi nga naman sa paggawa ng fireworks, mga chemicals 'yan, 'di ba? So kapag yung temperature nila sa storage doon ay mainit na, tumaas yung temperature, then talagang sasabog yung paggawa ng mga fireworks nila. Okay? So, ganun din sa lab. So, kailangan careful tayo sa mga chemicals natin kasi pwede siya mag-cause ng fire. Okay? Now, for the carcinogenic chemicals naman, again, ito yung pwede mag-cause ng cancer. So, example of that is the benzidine, common example of a carcinogen. A laboratory must maintain an accurate inventory of all carcinogens. Okay? Yun. So, may expose din tayo dyan. Of course, kaya nga naman, ang mga staff sa ospital, hindi yan talaga nandoon siya forever sa isang section. So, may mga section na nag-rotate ang mga staff para yung exposure mo hindi ganun kataas at hindi ganun lagi katagal. So, this is example of a spill kit. Ito. Yan. So, sabi ko nga kanina, marami klaseng spill, di ba? Meron kang acid spill, caustic spill, solvent spill, HF acid spill. So, hindi lahat ng spill pare-pareho. Okay? So, depende yan. Example lang yan ng spill kit. Pinakita ko lang. So, let's go to fire safety. Anong gagawin mo kapag nagkaroon ng sunog? Pagdating naman sa fire safety, meron tayong mga factors that you need to consider. So, unang-una is the fuel, the heat, or ignition source. So, this is ignition, may N yan. And, of course, the oxygen and air. So, ito yung mga elements na kailangan para makagawa ka ng isang fire. So, the fire triangle, so ito yung ginagamit natin usually. So, una muna kailangan mo ng heat, oxygen, fuel, and, of course, the uninhibited reaction. Okay? So, it is a three-dimensional pyramid known as the fire tetrahedron. A fire will extinguish if any of the three basic elements are being removed. So, kapag nabawasan ng oxygen, nabawasan ng heat, ng fuel, then hindi ka na magkakaroon ng isang fire. So, ito yung mga factors that will trigger a fire. So, kapag mayroon kang fuel, oxygen, heat, diba? Ignition source, then pwede magkaroon ng fire. So, ang fire, meron siyang different classification. You have the Class A fire. Kapag Class A, so these are fire coming from ordinary combustible solid materials such as paper, wood, plastic, and fabric. For the Class B fire, so these are flammable liquids, gases, and combustible petroleum products. For the Class C, these are energized electrical equipment. And for Class D, these are combustible reactive metals such as magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So, ito yung mga sources of fire. So, kapag Class B, nanggaling siya sa mga liquid and gases or combustible petroleum product. For the Class C, again, nanggaling niya sa mga electrical equipment. For the Class D, nanggaling sa mga metals such as magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So, ano ba yung mga different fire extinguisher? Of course, para malaban ng fire, kailangan mo ng fire extinguisher, diba, sa isang laboratory. So, you have different types of fire extinguisher and their application. So, first, the pressurized water extinguisher, as well as the foam and multi-purpose dry chemical types are used for Class A fire. Now, for the multi-purpose dry chemical and carbon dioxide extinguisher, they are being used on the Class B and C fire. For the halogenated hydrocarbon extinguisher are particularly recommended for use with computer equipment. For the Class D fire, diba? So, kailangan dyan ng special dry chemical extinguisher. So, generally, all that can be done for a Class D fire in the laboratory is to try and isolate the burning metal from combustible surfaces with sand or ceramic barrier material. So, sa laboratory natin, may kita mo sa ilalim, meron doong buhangin, merong sand. So, ginagamit din siya, of course, kapag may mga fire. So, besides sa fire extinguisher, pwede rin gumamit ng buhangin ng sand to contain the fire. So, ginagamit niya kapag chemical yung nag-cause ng fire or metals. So, ito yung mga example ng mga ating fire extinguisher. So, again, for the pressurized water and dry chemical, that is for the Class A fire. For the Class B fire, that is the dry chemical and carbon dioxide type. For the Class C, you're going to use the carbon dioxide, the halon, and the dry chemical. For the Class D fire, ito yung ginagamitan ng mga metals as well. Okay? So, pwede mo siyang gamitin ng sand sa mga Class D fire. Again, kapag gumagamit ka ng fire extinguisher, do not forget the pass, the pull, aim nozzle, squeeze, trigger, and sweep nozzle. Now, for the electrical hazard naman, so, importante kasi na yung mga electrical wiring is actually properly pagdating sa laboratory. So, ano ba yung mga ways para maiwasan natin ang electrical hazard? So, yung mga wiring na yan, mga equipment, dapat explosion rated. So, hindi siya pwede yung mga maninipis. So, kung gagamit ka ng extension, hindi pwede yung manipis na extension, yung wire. Pero yung machine mo, pagkalaki-laki. 'Di ba? Malamang, kapag gumamit ka ng extension, tas malaki yung machine, dapat yung makakapal din na ang wire niyan. Hindi yan basta-basta lang na extension or ang ginagamit. 'Di ba? Pero usually kasi kapag mga machines talaga directly pina-plug siya sa outlet. Hindi siya dapat talaga ginagamitan ng mga extension. Kasi nga yung wiring niya maninipis, tapos yung voltage na dumadali doon napakalaki kasi nga napakalaki ng machine. So be particularly careful when operating high voltage equipment such as electrophoresis apparatus kasi nga pwede ka makuryente rin doon, 'di ba? Only use properly grounded equipment or the three-prong plug. So, dapat yung plug niya, yung tatluhan, kasi yun yung may ground na type para maiwasan ng mga electrical shock. And of course, check for frayed electrical cords. Ito yung mga electrical cord na meron ng mga bitak-bitak, 'di ba? Kapag tingin mo na nakita mo na puputol na yung cord, malamang hindi na siya dapat gamitin. Promptly report any malfunction or of equipment producing a tingle for repair. So kapag may mga tumutunog sa equipment, malamang kailangan na ma-repair 'yan. Do not work on live electrical equipment. Never operate electrical equipment with wet hands, 'di ba? Common sense, 'di ba? Hindi ka pwedeng humawak niya kapag basa kamay mo. Know the exact location of the electrical control panel for electricity to your work area. So dapat alam mo kung nasaan yung mga breaker at electrical control panel na 'yan. Para just in case magkaroon ng mga fire regarding sa equipment, 'di ba? Or sumabog yung equipment. So, pwede kang pumunta doon sa control panel para patayin mismo yung electricity flowing on that area para hindi na mag-cause ng fire. Kasi yung fire usually, nagsisimula yan kapag meron kang malfunction sa isang machine. 'Di ba? So, kapag nakita mo, nag-malfunction na yung machine, tapos uusok na siya, mukha na siyang sasabog, pwede ka nang pumunta doon sa control panel ng electrical para patayin na yung current flowing on that area para hindi na kumalat yung sunog. So, use only approved extension cords and temporary application. So, hindi talaga applicable ang mga extension cord, di ba? Hindi pwede yung overloaded. Na napakalaki na makina mo, tapos ang dami nakakabit sa extension cord. Hindi po pwede yon. So, some local regulation prohibit the use of any extension cord. Mas maganda talaga kung directly siyang sinasaksak doon sa outlet. Iwasan ng extension cord as much as possible. So, have ground, polarity, and leakage check and other periodic preventive maintenance perform on outlets and equipments. So, kapag may mga tumutulo na machine na, tulad nga, tumutulo ng aircon, then hindi po pwede yon. Kasi nga, pwede, yung tubig niya, pwede siyang gumapang, pupunta doon sa machine, causing electric shock sa mga tao. So, how about cryogenic material hazards? Kapag cryogenic material, ito yung ginagamit natin sa mga frozen procedure or frozen section. So, gumagamit tayo ng liquid nitrogen. Ito yung common. So, yung mga cryogenic materials na yan, they're also prone to fire or explosion. Pwede rin mag-cause ng asphyxiation, pressure buildup, embrittlement of material, and tissue damage, similar to thermal burns. For the mechanical hazard naman, so ito yung mga equipment na pwede mag-cause ng harm. Tulad na lang ng centrifuge, autoclave, and homogenizer, 'di ba? Yung centrifuge na 'yan, so pwedeng mag-break diyan yung mga test tube, and then kapag may mga breakages, pwede ka masugat, 'di ba? Autoclave, pwedeng sumabog siya. Homogenizer, pwede ka masugat diyan. So mga pipettes na glass, 'yan, pwede ka masugat, 'di ba? Because they are very sharp. And of course, yung mga cork borer, needles, scalpel blade, and other tools, lab glassware, pwede ka masugat diyan. So those are example of mechanical hazards. Now, for the ergonomic hazard naman, ito yung mga working conditions natin na lagi natin ginagawa. Ito yung mga repetitive action, okay, na pwede mag-cause ng harm sa ating katawan. Tulad na lang ng pipetting, di ba? Kapag dahil ka nagpa-pipette, so lagi mo siyang ginagawa, yung trabaho na yon, then yung mga muscles mo sa hands, pwede magkaroon ng strain sa muscles mo. So, when you say ergonomic hazard, ito yung mga actions mo na repetitive, lagi mong ginagawa, di ba? So, pwedeng magkaroon siya ng effect sa muscles mo, sa posture mo, right? Yon. So, these physical actions can over time contribute to repetitive strain disorder such as tenosynovitis, bursitis, and ganglion cyst. The primary contributing factors associated with repetitive strain disorder are position posture, applied force, and frequency of repetition. So, kapag lagi mong ginagawa yung action, pwede magkaroon ng strain sa mga muscles mo. Okay? So, chronic symptoms of pain, numbness, or tingling in the extremities may indicate the onset of repetitive strain disorder. So that is what you call the ergonomic hazard. So kapag ergonomic hazard lang, tandaan nyo, ito yung mga ginagawa nyo repetitive sa laboratory na pwede mag-cause ng physical strain sa katawan mo. How are you going to disposal of hazardous material? So pagdating sa chemical waste, of course, you must flush it with water, soluble substances, down the drain with copious quantities of water. So kapag water soluble substances lang, pwede yan sa sa sink, pwede. Okay lang. However, kapag strong acid or bases na yan, dapat neutralize mo muna siya before disposal. So you should check the pH before disposal. All foul-smelling chemicals should never be disposed of down the drain. Inflammable solvents must be collected in approved containers and segregated into compatible classes. So, yung mga hindi pwedeng ibuhos sa sink, saan nilalagay? Saan dinadala? Usually, meron silang company that they contact that will collect those waste. So, hindi yan basta-basta din binibigay sa basurero. Hindi yan simple na basura na tinatapon na dadaan yung nagko-collect ng basura sa bahay nyo, ibibigay mo. Hindi ganun. So, dapat meron kang special company, yung mga ospital, meron silang kumpanya dyan na, na in contract with that will collect all of those waste. And then, yung company na yon sila yung bahala for the proper disposal of that. Okay? So, hindi lahat basta-basta lang tinatapon sa basura, hindi lahat basta-basta tinatapon sa sink. So, yung mga foul-smelling chemicals, hindi siya pwedeng ilagay doon. Lahat ng mga flammable, hindi rin po pwede. Okay? So, yung pwede mo lang ilagay sa sink, yung mga water-soluble substances, and then acids or bases na neutralize na. Yun lang ang pwede. The rest, dapat ipatapon sa professional.